Welcome to the Financial Technology Report, a leading information source on financial technology companies and solutions. In this episode, we speak with Dileep Thazhmon, founder and CEO of Jeeves, an all-in-one financial platform for businesses operating in over 30 markets worldwide. Jeeves enables companies to open multi-currency accounts, issue corporate cards, send cross-border payments, and manage expenses from a single platform. Dileep previously co-founded Power Inbox, a digital monetization platform that scaled to billions of emails monthly and was acquired in a $100 million exit. He has since led Jeeves' growth into a global platform, supporting businesses across currencies and regions. I'm your host, RJ Lumba. We hope you enjoy the show. If you like the episode, click to follow. Dileep, thanks so much for taking the time to chat with us today.
Thanks so much for having me on. I'm excited to chat about a few things.
Yeah, financial technology seems to be an area that you're particularly adept in. I'd like to dive right into Jeeves. Tell us about where you sit today, because I think the company seems like maybe it has evolved in some ways, but tell us about your most prevalent products.
Okay. So with Jeeves, we're building the first global business bank. The idea really is to target enterprise companies that today might need multiple vendors for their banking stack. So take a company that operates in Mexico and Brazil. You'd need two different corporate card providers, two different payment rails for Pay and Pix, two different credit providers, and so on. And so what we really do is try to be that single banking partner for enterprise businesses for B2B and provide the full stack. So that includes expense management with fully local cards, so card controls in Mexico, Colombia, Brazil, and 25 countries, as well as payment rails using fiat. And we just launched stablecoin actually 2 weeks ago, which is very exciting. And we also provide deposit functionality in some countries. And in regions like Brazil, we're actually getting our full banking license in a few months as well. So really the idea is, how do you become that one-stop B2B banking provider for large enterprise companies in global markets? And today we cover 25 countries and have about 5,000 enterprise companies that use us. And our biggest markets are in LATAM, which is Mexico, Colombia, and now Brazil, which is our fastest growing market today.
And is it more so for the companies that are based in those other countries or companies based in the US?
So it's actually the inverse of the US-based company. So think about a company in Brazil that has operations in Portugal or Mexico. Today, their setup is very complex. 3 countries, 3 stacks, all of that stuff. So we really focus on global companies that might need coverage in different countries. Now, if you're a company in Mexico headquartered that needs operations in the US, we can do both. We do have a US license as well, but it's less focused on US origin companies, if that makes sense, because there are many players in the market that focus on them. But the international companies, a Mexican company that needs to send money to Colombia, a Mexican company that needs cards in Spain, a Mexican company that has cross-border payments to the US, that is a very hard box to solve. So it tends to be global companies that operate in more than 1 or 2 countries. As an example, we work with BMW, H&M, Lululemon, Burger King, Nubank, and so on. And so that's kind of maybe a good box of like the companies we service.
And that's because like the pain point you're solving is, prior to Jeeves, a company would have to pay a lot in fees if they don't have an established presence in that other country.
Yeah, like as an example, we can underwrite a company in Mexico and give them 30 days of credit for card spend or payments in the US. So you can pay Google in the US, as an example. And so again, the same kind of argument. It's not like there aren't banks that can provide this. It's just they are probably not as user-friendly as we can be, where we're natively built for these countries and the specific needs that they need. So in Colombia, as an example, it's still surprising to many people where you actually have to go into the bank to send a payment. And that's something we can do on the app, right? And so some of these things that you might take for granted in the US, it's not necessarily the same internationally. And internationally, it's a lot more opaque, a lot more complex, but that's where a lot of the value of what we can provide is. So if you're a growing business, 60 people all the way up to 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, and you're thinking through, okay, I need to start controlling employee spend. I need to do payments more succinctly. I need to figure out how to get some interest on my deposits. That's where we come in.
Yeah, and you mentioned some large enterprise clients. Were they all looking to solve a similar pain point when they found Jeeves?
Yeah, so usually it starts with the corporate card, right? That's kind of the wedge in where it's free. We provide much simpler features. You can create unlimited virtual cards. You can control the spend. We can give you a single card for 1 day spend, and then it stops at the end of the day. You can create cards tied to, budgets for your events. So you just don't get a lot of that from like a traditional banking card. I mean, because that's not really the core problem they're to solve. So it usually starts with that. And then we also expanded payments. So today, if you look at our revenue stack, about 50% is expense management, which is a card software, and about 40% is actually payment. So that's accounts payable. Because if you think about a company spend, corporate cards is actually a pretty small part. Really, the bigger part is AP, it's bill payments, because think about it, where you spend most of your money as a company. It's not employees T&E. That is an important part, like, travel and expense. But bigger than that is paying vendors. So how do you do that, right? And so we launched a full AP automation stack that now generates about 40% of our revenues. So very nice, even split almost between card and payment. And we just started charging monthly SaaS fees as well. And that's now about 10-15%. So it's a pretty good like revenue split, not, heavily loaded towards just interchange on the cards.
Mm-hmm. And so rather than use like a bill.com, someone could use Jeeves because they could be like, oh, it's much easier to send globally.
And this is a good example, right? Bill.com is an amazing product. It tends to be US centric. It doesn't work in Brazil. You don't have Pix support. You don't have Boleto support. You don't have TED support. You don't have Space support in Mexico. These are all completely different rails that Bill.com doesn't service. And so Bill.com, I think, is a great example of the mix of products that we offer. It's just ours is tailored for the market. It isn't as simple as just using Bill.com there, because you need to be able to support local use cases. And it took us a while to learn that too, right? Where we're like, oh, let's take what worked in Mexico and see if we can launch that in Brazil. You can't. You got to build it for Brazil. You can take a little bit of the base, but it has to be tailored for Brazil. It has to be in Portuguese. It has to support local rails like Pix, which is instant. ACH, as an example, is not instant. But yes, if you want to think of it holistically, it would be similar to the product offerings of a Bill.com, but tailored very specifically to enterprises in those LATAM markets.
And do you know if Jeeves is typically the lowest cost solution?
Yes. It's almost always the lowest cost solution for these markets. And because we launched stablecoin for payments from US to Mexico, Mexico to US, our rates are very low, meaning we don't charge any fees. We take a small spread on the FX, but it's usually less than 15, 20 bips. So it's very, very competitive compared to even what you'd see as like your Google rate. So again, and the payment is instant. Actually, this weekend, it's funny, someone reached out to me because they were trying to do a payment from the US to Mexico. And on Saturday, they reached out saying, hey, the payment hasn't arrived. Can you help us? Within 3 hours, we got the payment to Mexico because we can do it on the weekend using stablecoin.
Is PayPal a competitor?
No, I think it's a very different business. And they tend to be more B2C, and then the B2B is more small businesses oriented. Like if you think about an enterprise, like it just has very different problems they're trying to solve as opposed to like the e-commerce or the S in SMB. So what we do see is banks. We'll see local banks that we do play with. And we don't necessarily need to be a replacement for a bank. And banks provide a lot of amazing services that we don't do today. But we can be that layer that sits on top and is much more user-friendly for you as end user. So like a Ramp in the US is a good comparison point. The only difference is we also do deposits.
And it sounds like you may have started with the idea of that this could be completely wrong, with US companies looking to make global payments out. But now it seems like maybe your customers are based in other countries and then working with other countries across the world.
Yeah, today we cover 25 countries. So we cover US, Canada, UK, Europe, Mexico, Colombia, Brazil. 70% of our revenue is from Mexico, Colombia, and Brazil because there's a real market need there. So again, it's not that we can't service companies that do US only, for instance. It's just that if you think about the product stack, there are probably better companies that only focus on the US. Whereas if you think about companies that are in Mexico and have a US entity, that's where we can be really, really differentiated because we can support both. We can give you local cards. Our cards are fully local, not a US card with a BIN that you're using, in a different country to eat the FX. Like when you get a card from Jeeves in Mexico, that is a Mexican issued local card, which is a very complex stack. So same thing in Brazil, same thing in Colombia. Every region, every country you get a card, it's a local card that we issue there.
Can you give us a sense for the scale? You mentioned some stats, like number of customers.
Yeah. So just as a rough pulse on it, we were doing about somewhere between 1.5 to 2 billion in yearly TPV. Mm-hmm. We've probably covered, I'd be 7 or 8 billion in total volume so far. And we have about 5,000 companies. I would say our goal is never to get to 20, 30,000 companies. Like it's really to get the best 5 to 10,000 companies and grow with them. And if you think about LATAM, we have the highest retention of companies in LATAM, meaning the per company revenue that we have is almost 3 times what a bank is, which again is because the type of companies tend to be bigger. They tend to come for one thing, then they grow across a different stack, which is great. And then, it helps a lot with the LTV CAC that we have as well. So just going through 2022, 2023, our business has also just been a lot healthier. I mean, we have almost 80% gross margins and about 45% contribution profit. So that's after losses, after cashback. So like really what's coming back, the business has scaled almost 2x in the last 8, 9 months, but costs has been about the same or coming down. And so again, it's like this very interesting box that we're in now, where a lot of the changes we had to make in 2023 is actually paying a lot of dividends now, where the business is growing very well and the cost is actually not growing proportionally. Cost is pretty constant or coming down, but the business is starting to grow, right? So it's a very interesting stage that we're in because we did a lot of hard decisions in 2023, paying the benefit now.
Do you continue to focus mainly on Mexico, Colombia, and Brazil?
Yeah, so our 3 main markets are Mexico, Colombia, Brazil. Mexico is number 1. Brazil is currently number 2, but we expect Brazil to be number 1 very shortly because it's growing very fast. Brazil as a market tends to have more of the customer profile that we're looking for, which is enterprise type companies. And we do, as I said, cover other regions, but that's not as much of a focus as LATAM. And one of the big things we launched is stablecoin payments, which now, again, focuses on LATAM because there's a lot of spread there, right? You want to move money from the US to Mexico. You want to move money from Colombia to the US. Very, very hard corridors to move B2B payments. And think about it, it's not like B2C where you're sending $10 or $100. You're sending $100,000 from Colombia. You're going to have to be able to withstand a lot of scrutiny because people are going to be like, what's the money? Where's it coming from? What's the origin? All that stuff. So what we do are really, really hard problems that we solve for these regions. But LATAM, specifically Mexico, Brazil, Colombia, tends to be the nexus that we're focused on and growing in.
Mm-hmm. One thing I thought that was interesting is you took in some debt financing. It seems like from more of an impact investor. Was that decision more based on because they're focused and growing maybe in these countries?
Yeah, they have a familiarity with the region. So they've done similar facilities for other fast-growing companies like Story, Zeppelin, that are also in the region. They've been great partners. It's community investment management. And so they understand the nuances of Latin America. And it's something that not a lot of US-centric investors might get. And so that was a big reason that we decided to go with them. We've actually been scaling even the facility we have, and we'll have probably something to announce there in a few months. But it has been growing very well. And, it's one of the big advantages that we have, which is we have a parent facility in US dollars, but we also have local facilities in Mexican pesos, Colombian pesos, and Brazilian reais.
And can you tell us a little bit about your equity investors? You've got some reputable ones there and how they've helped you scale.
Yeah. So our stack is, we've been lucky to get different stages of investors. Our biggest investor is Andreessen Horowitz. We also have Tencent in there, GIC, CRV, and so on. And so the biggest advantage is they just have seen a lot of different scaling companies at different stages. And so as we think about, as an example, what's the best stack between equity and debt? It's awesome. You can talk to them. They've seen it for other fast-growing companies, and they can give you a pulse on that very quickly. And then the second one is actually hiring. People don't realize, but as your company grows, you have to also bring in people that have seen a version of what you're trying to get to at different stages that you're in, especially in your direct leadership team. And one of the biggest advantages that I've seen is working with companies like Andreessen Horowitz that, again, have done this before, I've seen it before. You get access to their team that can help you think through the right candidate. And I think that's a big, big reason we've been growing so fast. We just brought in a chief revenue officer from Brex, actually, just to start scaling even more on sales side, go-to-market side. And I think when you think about the equity that we raised, more than even the capital, it's the sounding board that you get from investors that have seen the same play multiple times. And hopefully you can avoid some of the mistakes that you might have made otherwise.
Mm-hmm. We're going to head into the tail end pretty soon here of the conversation, but could you give us a little bit about your background? I mean, you have a very interesting background. Seems like you're a born entrepreneur.
Yeah. So I joke at this point, if I don't start a company, I'm basically unemployable. So Yeah, the first job I interviewed for was out of college, and that was the last job I interviewed for. So it's been a while that I've had to interview for a job. But my background, I have two engineering degrees a long time ago, and worked in M&A consulting for a little bit. That was my first job, and after that was at Stanford Business School for 2 years. And then the day after I graduated, I started my last company actually with my brother, and we spent about 8 years building that company. And very different times. We raised about 15 or $20 million and sold it for about 100 million plus. And then I've been working on Jeeves for the last 4.5 years. So very different space. The last company was in marketing automation space. This is in fintech, and very different company structures. Building a bank does require capital, very different from some of the other businesses, but the upside is very high because you're building like a structural business that is very hard to kind of take down, so to speak. And so yeah, I really really enjoy the creation aspect of startups. I don't have that many hobbies, so this is kind of my hobby, which is building something. Just like someone would paint something and you get that aspect of creating, right? Like that's what I feel out of startups. But you really have to enjoy the building, not the outcome. The outcome, everyone wants an outcome. I want an outcome too. But you have to fall in love with the process, because otherwise it'll completely burn you out. It is so demanding. It is so exhausting that you either have to enjoy that part of the business, or it's very hard to just continuously do this for, at this point, 15 years, right? So I'm lucky. I'm doing something I enjoy. I get to work with people I enjoy, and it's hard problems. And I do feel like when I think about why I like startups, I look at it as your time horizon is small, just here on Earth. So I want to work on hard problems, and hopefully that has an impact outside of just, an outcome that is monetary.
Related to company building, is there something that you previously were not good at in terms of being an entrepreneur that you now today are good at? So showing kind of dramatic improvement in an area.
That's a really good question. I think one of the things that I've become better at is knowing when to get help. And this can look like one saying, okay, this role, I don't know how to do this. So who do I talk to? That's, maybe another founder CEO to figure out what they did. Doesn't mean I have to do it, but I need to just understand more perspectives before I decide. I think that has changed a lot, especially with Jeeves, because we have coverage in 25 countries. We have employees in 12 plus. I just cannot hire that many people. I just don't know enough to hire that many people. And so one of the big things was we invested in the people function right from day one. And without that, we just wouldn't be able to scale to where we are. So I think that's a big area that I've improved. I think the other area that I've gotten better at, and I've always been kind of naturally inclined there, is making decisions with less than 80%, 70%. Now it's probably 50% information. And that's also a skill set you have to build. You have to be comfortable making a decision, even if you do not have all the information. Because by the time you get all the information, someone else has already made that call, and they probably already executed whatever you've been thinking to try to execute. So not deciding is a much, much higher cost, even if you don't have full information, than waiting to decide, when you have 20% more information. That skill set, I think, has become, for me at least, a lot sharper this time around. And that's something, again, I think I had a natural inclination there, but now I'm just much more tighter in making those calls and then moving forward and then making the next one. And it doesn't mean they're always right. It doesn't have to be always right, but you have to make them still, and you have to make them quickly, and then you have to calibrate in real time, right? I think that's where a lot of people get stuck. They made a decision, they don't know how to readjust. Doesn't mean you have to redo the decision, but you just have to start moving the decision as you get real-time information. And that's a skill set you have to kind of build that over time.
Okay, last two questions. One is, can you tell us about a person who has had a profound influence on you?
I think honestly, my mom has had a big impact on me. I actually grew up in 4 different countries and continents, and this was even in the late 90s. And my parents were both doctors, but my mom was actually running at the same time a side business that was focused on training computer education. And it wasn't successful, but I saw so much about how to do it, like how to kind of push it and how to get to a point where nothing is a no, you just figure out how to do it. And I think it wasn't here's a lesson in entrepreneurship. It was just you kind of imbibe it and you just see it and you're like, oh, okay, that's interesting. And I think that's been a very strong impact on me, because again, just startups are just so draining that you can't come in with oh, I know the answers. You just have to be nimble. You have to be able to adjust. And seeing that from my mom, and this was again in a era where you didn't have as many, let's say, female founders, was very impactful. So I think that's been something that I've always been able to lean on as an example that I can strive to do as well.
Last question. Can you tell us about a charity, cause, or other endeavor that you're passionate about?
Yeah, there's actually a few, but one of the things that I like to do myself is more focused on international donation. So just as another touch point, my dad also is a doctor, but the only reason he's a doctor is because he got a scholarship from, some couple in the US, I'm not sure, that was able to pay for his medical school. He just couldn't afford it. And I wouldn't be here if he hadn't been able to go to medical school, right? And so think about that impact of, I don't know, $500, $1,000, like just generational impact that came out of that. So there's a few charities that I focus on. They tend to be international focus just because I have just a place for that in my heart and really focused on kids' education. And so that tends to be the box that I tend to rotate my funds. I don't have one specific one. I kind of go with the causes. So it might not be the most efficient way of donating, but it's the way that I feel. That's what I lean into.
Wonderful. Well, Dileep, want to thank you again for taking the time. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much, RJ. I appreciate your time as well.